Basketball, when stripped down to its most fundamental essence, is not merely a physical contest determined by foot speed, raw strength, or maximum vertical leaping ability. It is, at its absolute core, an incredibly complex, high-stakes game of psychological warfare. This warfare is played out relentlessly on a highly visible rectangular wooden battlefield measuring exactly 94 feet long and 50 feet wide. During the golden, brutally physical, and fiercely competitive era of the National Basketball Association in the mid-1980s, this psychological warfare was not hidden away behind carefully curated public relations statements, social media managers, or shielded by the protective, quick-trigger whistles of modern professional referees. It was raw, it was visceral, it was bloody, and it was deeply, unapologetically personal. In this specific, unforgiving era of the sport, respect was not freely given simply because you were drafted high in the first round by a storied franchise, and it certainly wasn't handed out like candy just because you had secured a lucrative, highly publicized sneaker contract with a major brand. Respect, in the 1980s NBA, was violently and systematically extracted from your opponents through sheer force of will, through unrelenting physical intimidation, and through the fine, dark, and highly cultivated art of verbal destruction known as trash talk. And within this brutal, gladiatorial ecosystem, there were two very distinct types of men who walked onto the hardwood. There were those who talked loud because they were desperately trying to convince themselves and everyone else in the building that they actually belonged there. And then there were those who spoke softly, or not at all, because they already knew, with a terrifying, unshakable certainty, that they owned the entire building and everyone inside it. This is the definitive, unfiltered story of what happens when the loudest, most brash, most unapologetic, and physically dominant rookie in the history of the league decides to test the absolute, uncompromising limits of the quietest, most ruthlessly efficient assassin the game of basketball has ever seen. This is the story of Charles Barkley, a rookie desperate to violently carve out his own massive territory, and Larry Bird, a living legend who didn't just play the game of basketball, but actively, routinely dictated its physical and psychological reality. From the very first minute these two drastically different forces of nature stepped onto the same practice floor, they were destined to collide in a spectacular fashion that would permanently alter the rookie's understanding of what true, terrifying greatness actually looked like. The year was 1984. The setting was an empty, echoing practice facility in the heart of the East Coast, occurring just hours before the thousands of screaming, passionate fans would pour through the turnstiles to fill the arena with the suffocating, smoke-filled, highly charged atmosphere that characterized 1980s professional basketball. The air inside the cavernous cinderblock building was cold, drafting through the loading dock doors, and it smelled distinctly of stale arena popcorn from the night before, heavy, pungent industrial floor wax, the sharp sting of athletic tape being ripped from its roll, and the metallic tang of chilled iron radiating from the retracted bleachers. On one end of the impeccably polished floor stood Charles Barkley. At this early point in his young, explosive, and highly controversial career, Barkley was a physiological anomaly that the league had never seen before, and frankly hasn't seen since. He was a relentless gravitational force of nature, officially listed at 6 feet 6 inches, but likely closer to 6'4", built completely like a heavy-duty refrigerator, yet possessing the explosive fast-twitch verticality and blinding end-to-end speed of an Olympic track star. He was a rookie for the Philadelphia 76ers, drafted to join a legendary championship pedigree squad of hardened, no-nonsense veterans like Julius Dr. J. Irving, Moses Malone, and Maurice Cheeks. But Barkley, despite his rookie status, deferred to absolutely no one. He didn't care about hierarchy, he didn't care about paying his dues. He was loud, he was hyper-aggressive, and he carried a massive, jagged chip on his broad shoulders that fueled his every waking moment. Barkley believed, with every single fiber of his being, that he was the most dominant, unstoppable physical specimen on the planet Earth, and he used his mouth as a blunt, heavy instrument to batter the confidence of anyone who dared to stand in front of him. He talked constantly, a never-ending stream of consciousness. He talked loudly during warm-ups, he talked aggressively during the game, he talked to the referees after every single whistle, he talked to the coaches on both sidelines, and he relentlessly talked to the opposing team's bench. His specific brand of trash talk was a chaotic, torrential downpour of insults, grandiose boasts, and highly personal provocations, completely designed to drag you out of your technical game and pull you down into a chaotic, emotional street fight where his sheer, overwhelming physical power could easily overwhelm your polished technique. On the complete opposite end of the floor, standing in stark, almost comical physical contrast to the muscular behemoth from Auburn, was Larry Bird. If you were to bring an alien down from outer space who had never seen a human being play sports, and you pointed at Larry Bird telling them that this man was the most terrifying, unstoppable offensive weapon on the planet, the alien would likely register confusion. Larry Bird simply did not look like a professional athlete. He did not look like a man who possessed a multi-million-dollar contract and the adoration of millions. With his remarkably pale skin, his awkwardly slouching, stiff-legged posture, his messy, unstyled mop of blonde hair, and his perpetually tired, bored expression, he looked far more like a man who had just finished a grueling, back-breaking 12-hour shift repairing tractors at a Midwestern auto parts garage. But beneath that entirely unassuming, deceptively fragile and ordinary exterior resided a basketball supercomputer of unparalleled, almost frightening genius, and a competitive sociopath of the absolute highest order. Larry Bird was the undisputed reigning king of the Eastern Conference, a man who had already secured NBA championships, most valuable player awards, and the fear of every single defensive coach in the league. But far more terrifying than his impressive trophy case or his flawless shooting mechanics was his specific, legendary brand of trash talk. Bird did not yell like Barkley. He did not scream. He did not beat his chest, flex his muscles, or wave his arms frantically to draw the crowd's attention to himself. Bird's trash talk was clinical, surgical, and chillingly prophetic. He wouldn't just insult you, he would dismantle your entire reality. He would look you dead in the eyes, speak in a flat, monotone, nasal Indiana drawl, tell you exactly which spot on the floor he was going to stand on, exactly how he was going to catch the incoming pass, exactly what move he was going to put on you, and exactly how the ball was going to go through the net. And then, despite you knowing exactly what was coming, he would do it flawlessly, leaving your pride, your defensive scheme, and your self-worth completely shattered on the scuffed hardwood floor. It was during a quiet, seemingly mundane, totally routine pre-game shoot-around that the loudmouth rookie decided to test the boundaries of the Silent King. The two rival teams were sharing the floor, officially separated by the painted half-court line, going through their respective, heavily regimented warm-up routines. The heavy, synchronized, rhythmic thud of dozens of leather basketballs pounding against the wooden floor echoed throughout the empty arena, punctuated sharply by the high-pitched squeak of rubber soles cutting aggressively across the varnish. Barkley was absolutely feeling himself that afternoon. He was bouncing around the paint with manic, untamed, almost feral energy, aggressively and violently dunking the basketball with unnecessary force, hanging on the rim just a little too long, slapping the backboard, and shouting boisterously at his veteran teammates who mostly just rolled their eyes. He was actively trying to establish his alpha status in the building, projecting his booming voice across the empty velvet seats to ensure that every single person in the facility, the trainers, the ball boys, the coaches, and most importantly, the opponents, knew exactly who he was and that he was there to take over. His eyes, however, despite his chaotic movement, kept drifting purposefully across the half-court line to the Boston Celtics side of the floor. Specifically, his gaze kept locking onto the man wearing the green practice jersey with the number 33. Bird was standing quietly out at the three-point line, completely and utterly ignoring the rookie's theatrical, hyperactive display. He was systematically, rhythmically, and obsessively putting up jump shots. Catch the pass from the rebounder, pivot the feet to square up to the basket, rise up with minimal effort, release the ball off the fingertips with perfect backspin, and swish. Catch, pivot, rise, release, swish. Over and over and over again, functioning like a perfectly calibrated, soulless machine designed only for one singular purpose. He wasn't jumping high off the floor, he wasn't moving particularly fast, he wasn't breaking a heavy sweat. But the heavy leather ball never ever seemed to touch the iron rim. It was a completely mesmerizing display of pure, unadulterated muscle memory and flawless spatial geometry honed by hundreds of thousands of lonely hours in empty gyms. Bird's complete and total lack of acknowledgement of Barkley's presence infuriated the rookie. To the loud, brash, attention-starved Charles Barkley, silence was not golden. Silence was the ultimate, most profound form of disrespect. Barkley desperately needed a reaction. He needed validation. He needed to drag the stoic legend down into the emotional mud with him so they could fight on his terms. Barkley suddenly stopped his rebounding drill. He grabbed a loose ball out of the air with his massive hands, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned lighter, walked with heavy, purposeful strides right up to the very edge of the half-court line dividing the two teams, and puffed out his massive, barrel-like chest. "Hey, Bird!" Barkley yelled at the top of his lungs, his incredibly loud, raspy voice echoing violently off the concrete walls and ceiling rafters of the cavernous space. "You think you're the baddest man in this whole damn league just because you can hit a few soft, uncontested jumpers in an empty gym? You think you own this conference? You think everybody is just supposed to bow down to you?" Several players from both the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers abruptly stopped their warm-up routines. The chaotic, rhythmic bouncing of the basketball slowly, one by one, came to a complete halt, leaving a tense, heavy silence in their wake. The seasoned veterans on the Sixers squad, men like Julius Erving and Moses Malone, exchanged very nervous, highly knowing glances with one another. They knew firsthand that Barkley was an incredibly talented player with a boundless ceiling, but they also knew, deeply and intimately, the unwritten, unbreakable rules of the National Basketball Association. You absolutely do not wake up a sleeping Larry Bird. You let him go through his robotic motions, you pray to whatever higher power you believe in that he happens to have a rare off night, and you absolutely, under no circumstances whatsoever, give him a personal, emotional vendetta to focus his psychopathic competitive energy on. Barkley, completely oblivious to the silent warnings of his veterans, kept going, his volume increasing. I'm here now, old man. The future of this league is standing right in front of your face. You're too slow, you play like you got concrete in your shoes. You can't jump over a standard phone book, and if you even try to bring that weak, slow-motion stuff into the paint against me tonight, I swear to God I'm going to send your shot into the third row of the damn bleachers and make you retire. Bird had just caught a crisp chest pass from a ball boy. He was holding the ball casually at his waist. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn around immediately to address the shouting rookie. He stood there, his back to Barkley, for a remarkably long, agonizing, painfully stretched out moment, letting the heavy echo of Barkley's loud, aggressive words fade entirely from the humid air of the gym. Only when the silence was absolute did Bird slowly, mechanically turn his head. His face was a masterpiece of absolute, profound, devastating boredom. He looked the massive, muscular, visibly sweating rookie up and down, his eyes scanning from Barkley's expensive sneakers up to his scowling face, taking in the sheer physical intimidation that Barkley was trying so desperately, so obviously, to project. You talk an awful lot of trash for a guy who hasn't done a single damn thing in this league yet, Bird said. His voice was quiet. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a bark. It was flat, monotone, and completely devoid of any recognizable human emotion. It was the voice of a man making a factual observation about the weather. You're standing on the center logo, rookie. You're in the way of my shooting drill. Move your feet. The utter careless dismissal in Bird's voice was like a heavy physical slap to Barkley's face. It was worse than an insult. It was complete irrelevance. The rookie's eyes widened in genuine shock, his competitive fury instantly boiling over the edge. He couldn't handle being treated like a ball boy who had wandered onto the court. Barkley took a massive, aggressive step entirely over the painted half-court line, officially and purposefully invading Bird's designated team territory. I ain't moving anywhere, Bird, Barkley barked, raising a thick, heavily taped finger and pointing it directly at the chest of the legend. I don't care who you think you are. You think you can just shoot the lights out? You think you're the greatest shooter breathing oxygen right now? Prove it, right here, right this exact second. Put your money where your big mouth is. I'm so incredibly tired of hearing everybody talk about the great, untouchable Larry Bird. Bird finally, very slowly, turned his entire body to face the rookie. He squared his shoulders. The gym had now gone completely, terrifyingly silent. The athletic trainers sitting on the sidelines stopped unrolling athletic tape. The equipment managers froze entirely in their tracks, holding stacks of towels. Every single person in the massive building, the millionaires, the coaches, the staff, understood on a visceral level that a fundamental, incredibly dangerous line had just been crossed by the rookie. You want me to prove I can shoot a basketball to you, Charles? Bird asked, his tone shifting imperceptibly from profound boredom to a chilling, predatory, razor-sharp calmness. What exactly do you have in mind for this little demonstration? A bet. Barkley practically spat the words out, his massive chest heaving heavily with a surge of pure adrenaline and ego. One shot. Not a free throw, not a corner three-pointer. That's too easy for you. From right here. Barkley stomped his heavy size 16 sneaker violently onto the painted logo exactly at the dead center of the half-court line. Half court. One try. I bet you $45,000 you can't hit it. Cash money. 45 grand says you throw up a heavy brick, hit the backboard, and embarrass yourself in front of everybody in this gym. $45,000. The number left Barkley's mouth and hung in the heavy, humid air of the practice gym like a physical, tangible object. Let us take a moment to pause and truly, deeply contextualize the sheer, staggering, almost incomprehensible audacity of this specific wager. In the modern, highly monetized era of the National Basketball Association, where even mid-level role players sign fully guaranteed contracts worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, where players have massive global endorsement deals, crypto sponsorships, and venture capital portfolios. $45,000 might seem like a relatively trivial amount. It might seem like a casual fine handed down by the league office for complaining too aggressively to a referee or wearing the wrong color socks. But in the mid-1980s, the financial landscape and the economic reality of the league was entirely, fundamentally different. $45,000 was an absolutely astronomical sum of money. For a rookie like Charles Barkley, even as a highly touted first-round lottery draft pick, that specific amount represented a massive, highly significant percentage of his total yearly salary. It was the price of a beautiful multi-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood. It was the cost of several luxury automobiles. It was, quite literally, life-changing money for a normal working-class person. To casually throw that amount of cash onto the wooden floor for a single, mathematically improbable, highly chaotic shot was a testament to Barkley's supreme, blinding arrogance, his lack of impulse control, and his desperate, burning psychological need to definitively prove to the world that he could not be intimidated by the established, legendary hierarchy of the NBA. He was trying to buy his respect. Before we witness exactly how Larry Bird reacts to this monumental, unprecedented, and financially staggering challenge, and before we break down the terrifying, granular biomechanics of the literally impossible shot that is about to take place on this floor, I need to take a very quick, very important pause in the narrative. Right here, right now, in the middle of this freezing, dead silent basketball gym, before the heavy leather ball is even lifted from Bird's waist to begin its upward trajectory, I want to stop and ask you a question. A real, genuine question to every single person who is watching this video or reading this story right now. I want you to drop down into the comments section below this video and tell me exactly what state and what specific city you are currently watching this from. I absolutely love seeing the vast, sprawling geographical footprint of our dedicated basketball history community. I love seeing exactly where these legendary, unspoken locker room stories echo today. It genuinely fascinates me to know if you are watching this content from a crowded, noisy subway car in New York City, a quiet, peaceful living room in rural Texas, a bustling coffee shop in Southern California, or halfway across the entire world in a completely different country. So please, do me a huge favor, take exactly 5 seconds out of your day right now, scroll down, and drop your city and state in the comments section. Let's see how far and wide this incredible story reaches. And while you're down there in the comments section, if you are the type of person who truly, deeply appreciates the quiet, unseen, deeply psychological, and gritty behind-the-scenes moments of sports history, the raw stories that the mainstream television broadcasts and the highly sanitized documentaries completely miss or gloss over, please hit that subscribe button. We are actively, daily building a massive, dedicated library of the greatest untold, unscripted stories in sports history, and I want you to be a permanent part of this community. Your subscription is the exact fuel that allows us to keep digging into the archives, talking to the veterans, and bringing these absolute legends back to life. Now, with that said, let's get right back to the scuffed hardwood of the practice facility, where $45,000 of pure rookie pride and veteran hard cash is hanging thickly in the heavy air, waiting for an answer. The absolute total silence in the arena following Barkley's challenge was deafening. It was heavy, it pressed against the eardrums. The only sound left in the entire massive building was the distant, mechanical, rhythmic humming of the massive industrial air conditioning units mounted high up near the steel ceiling rafters. The reporters weren't there, the television cameras weren't rolling, the screaming fans were still out in the parking lot. Reggie Miller wasn't there to witness it. Michael Jordan wasn't there. It was just the hardened veteran Boston Celtics, the shocked veteran Philadelphia Sixers, the nervous training staff, and two incredibly stubborn men standing exactly 47 feet away from a metal ring, locked in a brutal battle of psychological wills. Bird looked slowly down at the painted half-court line dividing the floor, then slowly raised his eyes to look at the basket at the far end of the court. He didn't say a word initially, he just slowly bounced the basketball. Once, twice, 3 times. The heavy, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the leather hitting the wood echoed sharply off the concrete walls, sounding almost like a ticking clock or a judge's gavel. Bird did not look shocked by the massive, life-altering number Barkley had just thrown out. He did not look angry that a rookie was disrespecting him. He did not look nervous about the prospect of losing 45 grand. He simply looked deeply, profoundly, and utterly inconvenienced that he had to stop his highly efficient practice routine to deal with a child. $45,000, Bird finally repeated. His voice was incredibly soft, barely above a raspy whisper, yet because of the absolute dead silence of the gym, it carried perfectly across the entire floor, reaching the ears of every single player present. You really want to bet $45,000 of your own money on one single shot from half court? That's exactly what I said, old man, Barkley sneered, taking a half step back, spreading his legs wide and aggressively crossing his massive tree-trunk arms over his broad chest in a stance of pure defiance. One shot. No practice swings, no warm-ups. No second chances when you miss. You shoot a brick, you pay me my money. You scared to put your wallet where your reputation is? To fully, comprehensively appreciate the sheer magnitude of what is about to happen next, we have to take a moment to break down the sheer, terrifying physics, the anatomy, and the complex biomechanics of attempting a basketball shot from half court. A regulation NBA basketball court is exactly 94 feet long from baseline to baseline. The center of the half-court line is exactly 47 feet away from the absolute center of the rim. The rim itself is a steel ring suspended exactly 10 feet off the hardwood floor, and it is merely 18 inches in diameter. The official NBA basketball is roughly 9.5 inches in diameter. When a professional player attempts a standard jump shot from 15 or even 23 feet away, they are relying on a highly delicate, perfectly synchronized kinetic chain. This chain transfers energy flawlessly, starting from the push of the toes against the floor, traveling up through the calves into the bend of the knees, surging through the hips and the core muscles, extending up into the shoulder, hinging at the elbow, and finally releasing through a violent, precise snap of the wrist and the rolling of the fingertips. However, when you are standing 47 feet away, this standard, fundamental shooting form is almost entirely, completely useless. To generate enough sheer physical kinetic force to propel a heavy, inflated leather sphere 47 feet horizontally through the air, while simultaneously making it climb to a height of over 10 feet to clear the rim, a human being almost always has to drastically compromise their shooting mechanics. They have to resort to taking a running start to build forward momentum, or they have to launch a violent twisting full-body heave, or they have to throw the ball from their shoulder like a baseball pitcher. When a player does this, they instantly lose their center of gravity, they lose their vertical alignment, they lose their balance, and most importantly, they lose all semblance of accuracy and touch. The margin for error on a 47-foot shot is essentially, mathematically, zero. A deviation of a single microscopic millimeter at the point of release from the fingertips, or a fraction of a degree off in the launch angle, translates to a miss of several feet by the time the ball finally travels the distance and reaches the backboard. It is, for all intents and purposes, a complete prayer. It is a shot of absolute blind desperation, typically only taken as the final buzzer is sounding, accompanied by the closing of the eyes and a hope for a miracle. But Larry Bird, as a fundamental rule of his existence, did not believe in prayers on the basketball court. He did not believe in luck, he did not believe in hope, and he certainly did not believe in desperation. He believed in geometry, he believed in the physics of rotation, he believed in the thousands of hours of obsessive repetition, and above all else, he believed in his own terrifying, absolute, godlike mastery of the physical space around him. "All right, Charles," Bird said softly, his voice cutting through the tension. He didn't walk over to shake Barkley's hand to seal the deal. He didn't look around the gym to ask for a witness to confirm the bet. He didn't ask a coach to hold the money in escrow. He simply accepted the terms of the financial duel with the chilling, emotionless calmness of an executioner stepping up to the wooden block to perform a routine task. Bird walked slowly, with his characteristic stiff gait, over to the exact center of the painted half-court line. He didn't look back at Barkley. He didn't ask the massive rookie to step back out of his peripheral vision. He didn't take a deep, dramatic, chest-heaving breath to calm his nerves. He simply walked to the spot and stood on the painted logo, exactly 47 feet away from the target. This precise moment is where the legend of Larry Bird truly, definitively separates from the reality of mortal men. Any other player in the history of the league, faced with the staggering pressure of a $45,000 bet on the line, surrounded by their peers, and staring down a mathematically absurd 47-foot distance, would have immediately backed up. They would have taken at least 3 or 4 steps backward into the backcourt to get a running start. They would have gathered their momentum, leaping forward with maximum physical exertion, throwing their entire body weight and shoulder behind the heavy ball just to ensure it reached the rim. Larry Bird did absolutely none of that. He stood perfectly, completely still on the half-court line. He didn't take a single step backward. He squared his shoulders completely and perfectly to the basket at the far end of the floor. He perfectly aligned his hips, his knees, and the tips of his sneakers toward the iron ring. He held the basketball in his normal, standard shooting pocket, resting exactly where it always did, hovering just above and slightly behind his right eye. He wasn't preparing his body to heave a desperate, chaotic shot. He was physically preparing his body to shoot a standard, textbook, Fundamental jump shot from a distance where a standard jump shot was considered biologically and physically impossible for a human being to execute. The players watching on the sidelines, the Hall of Famers, the All-Stars, the seasoned veterans collectively held their breath. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his physical posture was mind-boggling. It broke the rules of physics. He was treating the center half-court line exactly, identically the same way he treated the 15-foot free throw line. Bird bent his knees slightly, dropping his hips into a perfectly balanced, compact crouch. He transferred the kinetic energy upward, rising smoothly onto the balls of his battered, well-worn Converse sneakers. He lifted the heavy ball, his right elbow tucked in perfectly straight toward the rim, his non-shooting left guide hand resting lightly, delicately on the side of the textured leather. He didn't jump forward across the line. He jumped straight up and down, a purely vertical, fundamentally sound elevation, sacrificing forward momentum for absolute, pristine mechanical balance. At the exact, highest apex of his incredibly modest, unimpressive vertical jump, he snapped his wrist. The release was an absolute blur of practiced, violent perfection. He generated the necessary power to travel 47 feet, not through a chaotic, twisting heave of his shoulders or back, but through the flawless, hyper-efficient transfer of energy from the floor up, and an incredibly forceful, whip-like snap of his forearm and his wrist. The ball left his fingertips. As it rolled off his middle and index fingers, it caught a beautiful, tight, rapid reverse rotation, perfect backspin. Bird landed softly back on the painted logo, his feet hitting the exact same planks of wood they had launched from. He did not stumble forward. He did not fall off balance. He did not flail his arms. He held his follow-through completely frozen in time, his right arm extended high and straight into the air, his wrist bent sharply and beautifully downward in the classic, textbook gooseneck position. He stood there on the logo like a statue carved out of marble, utterly motionless, his eyes tracking the flight of the ball. The heavy leather sphere climbed incredibly high into the cold, still air of the practice facility. Because it was a true jump shot and not a flat baseball heave, it soared in a massive parabola over the vast empty space of the court, carving a majestic, terrifyingly high arc that seemed to threaten to scrape the bottom of the suspended Jumbotron scoreboard hanging from the ceiling. Time inside the gym seemed to physically dilate, slowing down, stretching out into an excruciating, unbearable eternity. Every single pair of eyes in the building, from the millionaire superstars earning max contracts down to the minimum wage ball boys holding towels, tracked the spinning orange sphere as it reached its towering peak and began its steep, rapid, accelerating descent toward the small iron ring 47 feet away. Charles Barkley, the loudmouth, the instigator, stood absolutely frozen. His head was tilted far back, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. The aggressive, trash-talking bravado, the arrogance, the absolute certainty of his own dominance was physically draining from his face, evaporating with every single inch the ball traveled through the air. The ball did not hit the glass square on the backboard to bank in. It did not graze the front lip of the iron rim. It did not violently rattle around the inside of the cylinder, giving the crowd the illusion of suspense or luck. The ball dropped straight out of the sky, maintaining its perfect backspin, and passed directly through the exact mathematical dead center of the 18-inch hoop. Swish! The sound was sharp, it was dry, and it was incredibly, almost shockingly violent in the quiet room. It was the pure, unadulterated sound of heavy, fast-moving leather violently snapping tight, pristine white nylon cords. The ball fell straight down through the net without touching a single microscopic molecule of the orange metal rim. It hit the polished hardwood floor directly beneath the basket with a soft, resonant, heavy thud and bounced lazily, innocently toward the padded baseline wall, rolling away into the corner. Larry Bird was still standing on the half-court line. His right arm was still raised high in the flawless, statuesque follow-through. He had not moved a single muscle, had not twitched, had not shifted his weight since the exact millisecond the ball had left his hand. He looked like a monument to his own greatness. The absolute silence that followed the sound of that swish was heavier, denser, and far, far more terrifying than the silence that had preceded the shot. No one cheered. No one yelled in excitement. No one rushed the floor to high-five him or congratulate him on an amazing feat. The sheer, overwhelming, logic-defying impossibility of what had just occurred paralyzed the entire room. To casually accept a $45,000 bet, to shoot from 47 feet away, to do it on the very first try without a single warm-up, without a running start, using absolutely perfect, fundamentally flawless shooting form, was not just a display of skill. It was an act of basketball divinity. It was a glitch in the matrix of reality. It was a brutal, physical, undeniable demonstration that Larry Bird was operating on a completely different level of physics and reality that the rest of the league, including the incredibly talented Charles Barkley, simply did not have access to. Barkley's massive, broad shoulders slumped instantly, as if an invisible weight had been dropped onto his back. The loud, arrogant rookie, who had spent his entire life dominating everyone he played against physically, who had used his mouth as a weapon to terrorize college opponents and veterans alike, was completely and utterly speechless. His jaw was tight. He stared blankly at the empty net at the far end of the floor, the nylon cord still swaying slightly from the immense force of the ball passing through, and then he slowly, reluctantly turned his gaze back to the man standing perfectly still 47 feet away. Slowly, deliberately, taking his time, Bird lowered his right arm. He didn't smile, he didn't smirk, he didn't pump his fist in the air to celebrate his victory. He didn't turn to the crowd of stunned players on the sidelines to soak in their absolute shock and awe. He simply dropped his arm to his side, his face retaining that exact same, deeply bored, profoundly tired, almost annoyed expression he had worn the entire time. He looked directly across the floor at Charles Barkley. He didn't yell. He didn't need to raise his voice even a fraction of a decibel. In the dead, heavy silence of the shocked gym, his quiet, nasal Indiana drawl cut through the cold air like a perfectly sharpened surgical scalpel. "You can just have your agent write that check directly out to my charity, Charles," Bird said. His voice was dripping with an icy, devastating, absolute finality. "It wasn't a request, it was an invoice. And do me a personal favor. The next time you decide to open your big mouth in my gym, make sure you actually know who the hell you're talking to." Bird didn't wait for a reply. He didn't stand there waiting for Barkley to process the absolute, public humiliation. He didn't need Barkley to acknowledge his defeat. He simply turned his back on the massive, stunned rookie, walked with his stiff gait over to the metal ball rack on the sideline, picked up another fresh leather basketball, and calmly resumed his monotonous shooting drill on the side basket, completely unfazed, exactly as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had just occurred. Catch, pivot, rise, release, swish. The machine went right back to work. Charles Barkley, the loud, brash, seemingly unstoppable physical force of nature from Auburn, the man who would eventually go on to become one of the greatest, most dominant, most terrifying power forwards in the entire history of the sport of basketball, stood absolutely rooted to the painted floor. He was frozen in time. He had just received the most expensive, most psychologically devastating, most profoundly humbling lesson of his entire young life. He learned in the span of one single, mathematically impossible shot, the fundamental, terrifying difference between being an incredibly talented, physically gifted basketball player and being a cold-blooded, calculating, utterly ruthless killer. The story of the $45,000 half-court bet is a story that rarely makes it onto the highly polished, corporate, heavily produced documentaries about the 1980s NBA. You won't find grainy, high-definition camera footage of the ball leaving Bird's hand, or multiple slow-motion replay angles showing the perfect backspin rotation of the leather seams. It exists entirely as an oral tradition, a powerful urban legend passed down in the quiet, private corners of NBA locker rooms, whispered in hushed tones by the aging veterans who were lucky enough, or perhaps incredibly unlucky enough, to be standing in the gym that cold afternoon. It serves as a permanent, chilling historical reminder of the absolute psychological terror that Larry Bird inflicted upon his peers, a terror that went far beyond his stat lines or his championship rings. For Charles Barkley, the money was essentially gone the very second the bet left his loud mouth. The $45,000 was merely a financial penalty, a heavy tax levied by the basketball gods for his own blinding arrogance. The true, lasting cost of the bet was the utter destruction of his deeply held illusion that his physical strength, his incredible leaping ability, and his loud, intimidating voice could somehow bully or intimidate the absolute masters of the game. He learned that day that there are some rare men in this world who do not need to yell to completely command the room. There are some men who do not need to flex their muscles, puff out their chests, or invade your physical space to prove their absolute dominance. There are men who can simply stand perfectly still, look at a tiny iron target 47 feet away, and bend the entire physical universe to their will with a single flawless flick of their wrist. Larry Bird didn't just win a large sum of money that day. He didn't just hit a lucky, improbable shot from half-court to win an argument. He reached directly into the chest of the loudest, most confident, most physically intimidating rookie in the entire National Basketball Association, pulled out his aggressively beating heart, examined it, and calmly handed it back to him, all without ever breaking a sweat, all without ever changing his bored facial expression, and all on the very first impossible try. It was a flawless masterclass in spatial geometry, a triumph of thousands of lonely hours of obsessive, psychotic repetition in empty gyms across Indiana, and the most devastating, soul-crushing, absolute answer to a trash talker in the entire recorded history of professional sports. It was the definitive day that Charles Barkley, and everyone else in that gym, learned to truly fear the quiet, slouching man from French Lick, Indiana.